It's our position that the best policy is to fight to transform the existing trade unions. We don't give up these powerful organisations of the working class. And it's our opinion that in most cases, that would also be the response of workers themselves, provided they can see a means to do it. Where you've got a fighting, active, broad left in a trade union, then even if it's got a right-wing leadership, you join and you think that these people organised fighting back, I can see how this trade union can be transformed. But we have to be honest, at this point in time in Britain, in most cases, with the exception really of the PCS because of the role we play in it, the broad lefts are empty shells. And even whether we take part in them is a tactical issue. It depends on whether we consider they can take the struggle forward. If we feel that they can't and they're preventing us taking the struggle forward, it's better not to take part in them. It's a little bit like, and Jared used this example at a national committee actually, it's a little bit like the question of a new workers' party. We fight tooth and nail for the development of a genuine mass party of the working class. But it doesn't mean that we take part in an abomination like Respect, because we don't consider it to be a genuine step towards a new mass workers' party of the working class. And we have to take, it's not comparing all the broad lefts to Respect, but we have to take a similarly tactical approach on the question of the broad left. And we have to recognise that in some cases, workers will look for other means to struggle. And we have to be sympathetic to that. While we want to fight to transform Verdi in Germany, we did not attack the bus drivers who started leaving Verdi and joining the train drivers' trade union. Any more than here in London, we would attack the bus drivers who are talking about leaving the TNG Unite and joining the RMT. Now, on behalf of the RMT, there's no doubt from its leadership, there's an element of kind of poaching, of trying to get extra members here, which goes on between all of the trade unions. But that's not the issue for us. The issue for us is, why do those bus drivers think the RMT is better than their union? And the answer is because they see that it's fighting for its members. And we have to recognise and be sympathetic to those kind of searching for a different road amongst sections of the working class. We also have to recognise it could happen on a bigger scale in the future. We have to think, and this is speculation at this stage, about what will happen when young people enter struggle, because in general, they're not active in the trade unions at this point in time, but that's going to happen at a certain stage. Will they all automatically even join trade unions initially? We could see strikes and walkouts semi-spontaneously without necessarily being part of an existing trade union. Then when they decide to join one, will they go to the one that applies to their sector, or will they go to the one that they see Bob Crow on the telly leading a fight? We could see some very odd workers ending up in the PCS, the RMT, and so on. I'd make another point on young workers, by the way. I'm not suggesting we're going to go back to the prehistory of the working class in Britain, where if you look to the illegal trade unions that existed in the 1840s, they did use semi-terroristic tactics. They did do things like pay workers to shoot the boss and stuff like that. I'm not suggesting we're going to go back to that. But, given... that's obviously quite popular here. and then pay their fees to get to Australia to escape, but anyway. But, given the anger that exists at the same time as the inexperience of young workers, you will see an element of Southern Europe or even of Latin America coming to Britain. Things like what Carl described in Bolivia, where the workers were occupying, policemen actually, were occupying the police office, whatever it's called, station, for a couple of weeks, workers going on hunger strike, workers holding the bosses hostage, all those kind of things, which in recent history are much more the tradition of the Southern European working class, are likely to be a part of the struggle in Britain as well. And I think we just have to draw a general conclusion, which is we take reality as it comes, we're flexible, we go to where workers are struggling, but we also recognise whenever you get a qualitative change, a new generation entering the fray, and that is what we're going to see in the coming years in Britain, you also get some changes in organisational forms. Not always on the scale of the new unionism movements in Britain at the end of the 19th century or the development of the CIO in the US, but nonetheless, you get new and innovative forms as workers struggle to find new methods of organisation. And I would just add on that the National Shop Stewards Network, and tender plant as it is at the moment, could play an important role in those developments in the coming months and years. Now, just one final point on the trade unions. We shouldn't assume that an increase in struggle will automatically lead to an end to the witch hunt. It could, but it's not by any means. It's also possible, with their backs against the wall, the right-wing trade union bureaucracy will lash out even more than they are at this point in time. We've raised the possibility of the fact that the RMT have now linked up with the Oil Workers Union, which is not part of the TUC. Is it possible there could be moves to expel the RMT from the TUC as a result of that? And if that were to happen, what would our attitude be, for example, in the PCS? We would fight for the RMT to be readmitted to the TUC, but we would also link together with them to form a bloc of fighting trade unions, part in and part out of the TUC. You couldn't then exclude the right-wing leadership of the TUC moving to expel everybody who associated with the RMT and getting, in effect, 2 trade union congresses developing in Britain. I'm not saying that is necessarily going to happen or is even the most likely, but it's a possibility. We should not assume, on the basis of the coming mighty struggles that we're going to see, that it will automatically be the case that structures will continue as they have been in the past. Now, of course, trade union perspectives will form an important part of this discussion, and it has formed an important part of my lead-off. But it shouldn't be the whole, not by any means. Nor is it true that struggle will only take place on economic issues. The question of climate change, as Lynn said in his summing up, is an increasingly important issue. At this stage, it's mainly young people who are mobilised on the streets on it, but that could change in the future, and it's an enormous issue amongst young people at this point in time. Linked to that is the question of nuclear power and New Labour's determination to go ahead with a new generation of nuclear power stations. There's also other issues. The question of abortion that got raised this morning. We have noticed, there's no question about this, there is a new generation of young women who are getting active on issues like abortion, which was not the case previously. Up until this year, we've been kind of alone in keeping the flag flying for International Women's Day. It's often been the case we've had individual women from a kind of feminist background who've come to our events because they couldn't find anything else going on to do with International Women's Day. This year, there's a whole series of events taking place, including linked to the question of abortion rights. So we have to be aware of that kind of new generation of women entering struggle. We also have to look at the effect of a recession on the political process and on political parties. Now, we don't spend enough time on this really in our discussions, but I think part of the reason for it is where the political parties are so close together, the establishment parties, you can't get a cigarette paper between them. It means it's actually very difficult to work out what's going to happen in electoral politics, because tiny secondary issues can lead to swings in the opinion polls, but basically there's nothing dramatic to choose between them. Nonetheless, it's important that we discuss it. And we have to say, firstly, Gordon Brown is an extremely weak Prime Minister, and he will continue to be so. We say in the Perspectives document he's intending to hold on till 2010 to go at the last possible minute for a general election. Actually, it seems that he's talking about going next year, and that's a possibility. It's also a possibility that he's stupider than we are, and when he actually gets to next year, he realises that's just not possible, and he's got no option but to hold on to the last minute. It's a weak government. He's seen as being no cleaner than Blair when it comes to sleaze and the rest of it. He's no longer seen as better at standing up to the US and George Bush in particular than Blair was before him. And increasingly, he's no longer seen as economically competent, which was Brown's strong card. That hasn't completely played out yet. He may not be seen as economically competent the way he was before now, but it will get much worse as recession and slowdown hits. He faces all kinds of other obstacles, which I don't have time to go into. How long have I
50 minutes.
Okay, I don't have time to go into. But for example, it's not ruled out still he could be forced to hold a referendum on the question of the European non-constitution. It's extremely unlikely now because the Liberal Democrat peers are going to rescue him by refusing to abstain and voting with the government in the House of Lords, but it can't be absolutely excluded. He's under increasing pressure on the national question, and it's important comrades in this discussion from Scotland and Wales speak, because it is a different political situation, actually, particularly in Scotland, but to some degree in Wales as well. It's what they're going to speak, they don't need me to say that. But it also has an effect here too, because after all, Brown is an MP for a Scottish constituency, and he is Scottish himself. And the Tories can use that when he's pushing through policy on the NHS and so on, which only affects English constituencies, and yet he's using Scottish MPs, including himself, to vote for it. So that's another complication complication that he faces.